manifested, but it was everywhere. More attention, a larger presence, constant praise, basically more of everything great. What if she misbehaved? No consequences. Mom would laugh it off like it was the cutest thing in the world. Growing up in the shadow of a beloved brother is an especially terrible experience. It reduces your self-worth. You continuously feel inadequate, as if you're always in second place, or, in my case, third. You begin to believe that no matter how hard you work, you will never be as excellent as others. The most hurtful component was Mom's outright reluctance to admit the bias. If Nancy said something cruel, and trust me, she had a skill for it, Mom would ignore our injured sentiments, stating we were overly sensitive or Nancy was joking. However, it was never a joke. You could see it in Nancy's eyes, in the small, satisfied grin she'd give. She relished making us feel small. I recall a period when I was approximately 12. I received new clothing, which I was quite excited about. Nancy took one look at me and exclaimed, "It makes you look even wider than usual." Mom just laughed and said, "Oh Nancy, don't be silly." But I felt my face boil with humiliation. It was a consistent pattern. Our family seemed divided into two teams. Mom and Nancy against the world, and Dad, Damon, and me, who were constantly on the defensive. Even Dad wasn't a dependable teammate. He would frequently flip sides, presumably to keep the peace. So, what types of activities did Nancy do? It was a relentless assault of vitriol directed at anything and everything: my appearance, Damon's job goals, our life choices. Nothing was off bounds. She had a flair for identifying and exploiting your insecurities. The Thanksgiving situation with Damon is an excellent illustration. He was enthusiastically expressing his literary degree, his love of reading, and his desire to write. Nancy casually referred to him as an unemployed burden at the dinner table, in front of the entire extended family. The hush that ensued was deafening. Dad grumbled something about Nancy being out of line, but Mom simply smiled indulgently. Another day, after a particularly demanding week at work, I was complaining to Nancy about how fatigued I was. She pounced on that, starting into a rant about how I looked extremely haggard and how my long hours meant I'd never find a guy. She said, and I remember the exact words because they stung so badly, "You look like you haven't slept in days, and honestly, no guy wants a workaholic hag who looks like she's aged 10 years in the past too." I went utterly silent for several weeks following that. I couldn't force myself to speak to her. It wasn't only us. She treated friends, extended family, and strangers with the same casual disrespect. Anyone other than Mom was fair game. Damon and I rightly harbored considerable hatred. We despised Nancy's brutality, but we despised Mom much more for allowing it. I recall having a particularly intense debate with Damon during which I stated that we despised her for it, referring to Mom's unflinching support for Nancy's behavior. I know it seems harsh, but it's the honest truth about how we felt. I believe Nancy's physical attractiveness contributed to her difficulty coping. She appeared conventionally attractive. I know it sounds petty to admit, but it is relevant. It is simpler to disregard insults from someone you consider equal, or even someone you regard as inferior to you. However, when someone who is commonly regarded as gorgeous tells you that you are not, it is taken more seriously. It plants the seed of doubt in your mind. I began to question my own appearance and worth. Looking back, with the advantage of hindsight and therapy, I believe Nancy's relentless urge to criticize others stemmed from her own deep-seated insecurity. She did not follow a traditional career path. She dabbled in freelance graphic design, but it was more of a pastime than a profession. She depended greatly on our parents, both financially and emotionally. Perhaps she belittled others to compensate for her own perceived flaws. Damon and I tried to disregard her words. Until we were 25, things changed radically. Our father died 8 years ago, and he was, in many ways, the glue that held our fragmented family together, despite his own role in the imbalance. He wasn't ideal. He certainly tolerated Nancy's behavior more than he should have. But he was the one who periodically attempted to mediate, to smooth things over, to keep some sort of order. His death devastated their fragile connection. After he left, Damon and I began to move apart from Mom and Nancy. It began slowly, with fewer phone calls and visits. We'd still see them at big family gatherings, the rare holiday, and maybe Christmas, but only on special occasions, if we felt like it. If we wanted to, we could make that phrase our motto. Then it became an intentional decision. We actively began avoiding them. A wall, as I've learned to call it, had formed between us and them. Honestly, I liked the wall. It provided a much-needed barrier, reducing exposure to Nancy's attacks and witnessing Mom's angry enabling. Initially, following Dad's illness and final death, we made real attempts to retain communication. We felt obligated. I think. But those attempts were really strained. Each phone contact and visit felt forced and unpleasant. During those brief contacts, Mom would almost always say or do something that reinforced our need for distance. She'd make some lovely remarks about Nancy's non-existent successes or discreetly critique our decisions, reminding us of why we were pulling away in the first place. One especially embarrassing Christmas meal, Mom spent the entire evening extolling Nancy's creative talent, displaying some very horrible drawings Nancy had allegedly done for a large client, who turned out to be a distant cousin. Meanwhile, she entirely overlooked Damon's recent promotion and my successful completion of a large assignment at work. It was a vivid reminder of the dynamic we were attempting to avoid. Damon and I eventually started making excuses, which became more complicated. We were overloaded with work. We had prior engagements. We were coming down with something, anything to avoid spending time with them. We understood that the emotional cost of those contacts far exceeded any felt familial obligation. Damon and I shared a tacit, unspoken agreement. We both acknowledged the dysfunction and implicitly agreed that distance was the best option. It wasn't that we didn't want to visit after Dad died, rather, we opted not to. It was not about insulting his memory. It was about safeguarding our own mental and emotional health. Crucially, Mom and Nancy made no meaningful effort to keep communication. They weren't continually phoning, pleading with us to come. The decision to drift away was mutual and unspoken. We were all financially stable, so there was no practical reason for frequent interaction. It was just easier to maintain different orbits. Silence was a relief. Damon suffered a serious accident a few years back and shattered his ankle. He was between jobs at the time and devoted all of his efforts and resources to the establishment of an online magazine. Money was scarce, and medical expenses were building up. As the CFO of a successful company, I volunteered to assist him in covering the bills. He originally refused, being the fiercely independent individual that he is, but I persisted. I didn't want him to spend his savings just as his magazine was ready to launch. I covered everything: his medication, the considerable physiotherapy he required, and even the cost of a full-time nurse to help him recuperate. To me, it was an obvious choice. It wasn't about the money. It was about supporting my brother, whom I actually cared about and wanted to succeed. It was an expression of sibling love and support. This gesture of charity, however, unintentionally established a hazardous precedent in the minds of Nancy and my mother. A few weeks later, Nancy called me and left me stunned. It was so bold and weird that I immediately assumed she was joking. She told me she wanted to acquire a penthouse apartment. Not just any apartment, but a penthouse, and she required my financial assistance. She defended her ridiculous request by claiming that she was embarrassed to still be living with her mother at the age of 28, and that since I had helped Damon, it was only fair that I also aid her. She carelessly forgot to disclose that she only had enough money to pay for half of the cost of this luxurious apartment. My instant reaction was a mix of disbelief and boiling rage. We rarely talked, and when we did, it was generally interrupted by Nancy's insults and hostility. And now, out of nowhere, she is asking for a large sum of money. It was surreal. We had not had a genuine, meaningful chat in years. The last time we spoke, she was busy criticizing my life choices, doubting my career, and making snarky remarks about my appearance. The audacity was amazing. I sought to understand her career, or lack thereof. She billed herself as a freelance graphic designer, although it was more of a casual pastime than a legitimate profession. She had no formal education, no degree, and no portfolio to speak of. She'd made a couple of posters for Dad's firm years ago, but they hadn't been utilized. She pretended to have a list of exclusive clients, but they were mostly family friends drawn in by Mom's constant push. It was certainly not a career that would allow me to afford a penthouse. So I gave a solid no. I told her straight out that I was not going to support her expensive lifestyle. I suggested, perhaps a little harshly, that she consider finding a real job if she wanted to purchase such pleasures. I know it wasn't the most polite response, but I was honestly taken aback by her entitlement. She took my refusal poorly, as one would expect. She went on a furious diatribe, accusing me of bias towards Damon. She screamed about how I had readily assisted him with his medical expenditures and how it was my responsibility as the eldest sibling to support her too. She entirely ignored the reality that Damon's predicament was an actual emergency, whereas hers was a self-induced craving for luxury. I tried to be calm, but my patience was getting thin. I reiterated my refusal, emphasizing that I was not a bank and was not obligated to pay her unreasonable goals. I was so disgusted by her entitlement and complete lack of self-awareness. It was as if she truly believed she deserved this penthouse simply because she was my sister. The talk quickly turned into a full-fledged dispute, with Nancy's voice reaching near hysterical levels. Finally, I said no one, and hung up the phone. I couldn't take another second of her screeching. She phoned back several times, but I ignored every call. I was finished. It was quite evident that our relationship, or whatever pretense of a relationship we had, was entirely transactional for her. She only contacted me when she wanted something, with no consideration for my sentiments or the years of awkward quiet between us. It was completely exhausting. Unsurprisingly, the drama did not end with Nancy's rage. My mother called me next, and the talk was much more aggravating. She began with a whining, passive-aggressive tone, complaining about how unfair I was to Nancy and accused me of playing favorites. She claimed I owed them anything because of my upbringing. Then she revealed an important detail. Nancy had approached our uncle, Dad's brother, who had taken over the family business, before coming to me. He had rightly turned down her plea. This exposed the extent of their desperation, and the fact that I was their second option further increased my rage. A little background: I purposely chose a career path outside of the family business. I did not want to be involved, neither did Damon. To be honest, Nancy didn't either, until it was convenient for her to pretend differently. After Dad died, his brother took over the company, and Mom lived comfortably on Dad's shares, which had been legally transferred to her as part of his will. Mom then admitted that their financial condition was fragile, owing to Nancy's lavish spending habits. She claimed that providing Nancy the money for the penthouse would make things easier for her in the future, implying that she wanted me to subsidize Nancy's lifestyle so she didn't have to. She then used the standard guilt trip, threatening no contact if I refused to comply with their requests. This was simply ludicrous, given that we were already in a position of very little interaction. I politely pointed out the contradiction, telling her that it wasn't my concern and that Nancy could get a job or stay with her until she was 35, for all I cared. My wrath, which had been building for years, suddenly erupted. I let loose a flood of pent-up rage. I told her she had no right to accuse me of favoritism because she had been doing it my entire life. I reminded her that Damon and I had made peace with her obvious preference years ago, when we accepted the truth of our broken family dynamic. I clearly explained that I owed them nothing, that I had my own life, obligations, and objectives. She responded with more ranting, accusing me of being ungrateful and disrespectful. She screamed that she never wanted to speak with me again. I chuckled. Because, really, what difference would it make? We scarcely spoke as things were. I mentioned my approaching wedding, emphasizing that I did not need her presence in my life. Then I hung off the phone and blocked her and Nancy on every platform possible. An important detail I didn't mention earlier: I should probably clarify that I am engaged to a beautiful, supportive man named Andrew, 37M. We've been together for nearly 5 years, and he's been quite understanding of the nuances of my familial situation. Initially, I considered bringing Mom and Nancy to the wedding solely out of obligation, a desire to keep some sort of family peace. But what happens following that explosive phone call? That thought went totally. However, the aftermath of the confrontation was not as simple as I had anticipated. Mom, unable to reach me directly, messaged Andrew via social media. She poured out her highly biased version of events, expressing her profound disappointment in me and announcing that she would permanently cut me off. Despite knowing I was right, I felt a little guilty. It's a bizarre, irrational feeling, that societal indoctrination that tells you that family is everything, regardless of how bad the connection is. Furthermore, Andrew first hesitated to grasp the situation properly. He is from a close-knit, caring, and supporting family. He had no idea that his mother and sister could be so cruel. He originally felt pity for Mom and Nancy, seeing them as the victimized parties. He couldn't fully realize the severity of the malfunction. This caused a temporary but major strain between us. I felt myself having to justify my conduct, explaining the situation's history once more. So, Reddit, AITA. I honestly don't believe I am, but I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. And thank you for reading this entire long narrative. Update 1. Fortunately, the encouragement I received online from strangers on Reddit who had read earlier sections of this story was quite affirming. Their remarks, shared experiences, and unflinching support all helped to alleviate those niggling doubts. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that my emotions were genuine, and that I had every right to defend myself from toxic people, even if they were family members. Damon, as always, reiterated what the online trolls were saying. He reminded me of innumerable examples of Mom and Nancy's manipulative conduct, constant negativity, and complete lack of empathy. He acknowledged my feelings and assured me that I wasn't being unreasonable or overreacting. He, too, had been through it. He understood. A crucial turning point. The most significant turning point, however, was when Damon sat down with Andrew and described the problem from his perspective. He gave specific examples, went over the history of the family dynamic, and built a vivid picture of the emotional toll it had on both of us. Hearing it from Damon, who had seen the dysfunction personally, made all the difference. Andrew's opinion changed almost fast. He finally understood. He saw the problem for what it was. A toxic, extremely unhealthy familial dynamic that I needed to get away from. He apologized for his initial concerns, confessing that his own happy family experiences had blinded him to the reality of my circumstance. He even stated that his own parents would never behave in such a manner. From that point forward, Dad became my loyal supporter, totally backing my decision to cut ties with Mom and Nancy. Taking action, so we took action. We stopped them, Mr. Damon, Andrew, all of us, on all platforms. Update 2, just as I thought it was over? Just as I thought the drama was done, it took another unexpected turn. My uncle, Dad's brother, who had taken over the family business, contacted me and Damon about an urgent situation. He sounded quite anxious. Nearly frantic. He informed us that Mom was preparing to transfer a significant percentage of her company shares to Nancy. And not just any shares. She meant to offer Nancy voting shares, giving her enormous authority over the company. His reaction was quick. He thought it was a completely bad idea. A recipe for calamity. He understood, as we all did, that Nancy was completely incompetent in business. She had no experience. Complete lack of comprehension. She has absolutely no interest in anything other than her own superficial desires. Giving her vote rights in the corporation was, in his opinion, a terrible blunder that may destroy the entire operation. He stated that while Mom theoretically had voting authority, she had always deferred to his judgment. She had never interfered with the operation of the firm, trusting him to make wise decisions. He was really concerned that if Nancy took control, things would change. He saw continuous debates, power struggles, and potentially dangerous judgments motivated by Nancy's desires and Mom's blind favoritism. He plainly indicated that he did not want to be in ongoing disputes with them over every area of the firm. A difficult realization, Damon and I became instantly alarmed. We understood that the company's success was critical, not just for our uncle, but for the livelihoods of many people. We also experienced a sense of obligation. A lasting commitment to our father's legacy. So we arrived at a difficult decision. We couldn't just stand there and watch this unfold. We felt a moral obligation to intervene and try to avert what we perceived as an imminent calamity. We agreed to speak with our mother, despite our damaged relationship and the recent heated incident. We also felt a special obligation to our uncle, who had been so supportive and kind to us following Dad's death. He had, as I previously stated, watched out for us, and we couldn't in good conscience leave him to cope with this potential disaster on his own. We were concerned about the company's future, and we felt compelled to safeguard it, even if it meant confronting Mom and Nancy again. Update 3, the confrontation. We braced ourselves and went to see Mom, well expecting that Nancy would be there, and that her presence would make the conversation exponentially more difficult. We knew it would be unpleasant, but we believed it was necessary. As expected, Nancy was perched behind Mom like a deadly bird. We jumped right into the subject, expressing our strong objection to the plan to give Nancy voting shares. We labeled it an utterly ridiculous concept without holding back. Mom originally used a technique of stony silence, refusing to acknowledge our presence or worries. She completely ignored us as if we were not present in the room. Then she changed tactics, stating that we had no right to meddle in her decision and that she had no desire to engage with us. Nancy, predictably, screamed about how we were envious of